All right, Matthew 5, beginning in verse 33. It says, "Again you've heard it said, you shall not, to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor shall you swear by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. You shall not swear by your own head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your yes be yes, and your no, no. And whatever is more than this is from the evil one. And you've heard it's been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. If a man smite you on your right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you to take away your tunic, give him your coat as well. And whoever compels you to go with him 1 mile, go with him 2. And give to him who asks of you, and to him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. And you've heard it's been said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemies. But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use and persecute you, that you may be the sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? If you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Even the tax collectors do the same. Therefore you shall be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." Now, just to quickly review the section beginning in verse 33 through verse 36 with regard to the matter of oaths. And noting that, and we talked about this, I guess now it's been 3 weeks since we had this particular section, that the performance or the taking of an oath is not in and of itself inherently wrong. Jesus is dealing. Note the introductory statement. You have heard that it's been said to those of old. Now, he's talking to Jews, therefore he's talking to Jews about Jews. In other words, those of old are the Jewish ancestors. In other words, they're people going all the way back to the time of the giving of the law. And so again, we want to understand this statement in its context, and we also have to understand it at that time in its present context. In other words, what was going on? What was going on? And we know, first of all, that even in the Old Testament, that oaths were not forbidden. It says, "You shall perform your oaths to the Lord," and the Lord will not hold those guiltless who take an oath and don't keep it. All right, so we know that taking of an oath is not inherently wrong. But what was going on in that day was, as you see it, like it's in the first or second paragraph of the lesson, was that the Jews would take oaths, but they would not bind that oath unless that oath was connected to something that was considered as holy or divine. In other words, if they might swear by God, or they might swear by heaven, or they might swear by the temple, they might swear by the altar, and then even beyond that, and those were the only oaths that had to be kept. But then it went even further. Then it says that he who swears by the temple, it is nothing, but he who swears by the gold of the temple, he's obligated to keep it. Now, and then Jesus said, "Well, wait a minute." He said, what thing is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifies the gold? And so even they'd gone even further, that you could swear by the temple and you weren't even obligated to keep it. But if you swore by the gold of the temple, then you're obligated to keep it. And so it tells us about their attitudes toward their oaths, and that they were nitpicking. By the way, I don't know if kids still do this, but when we would promise or swear to do something, what could you do that nullified the promise or the swear? That's right. Cross your fingers. Matt, did you just cross your fingers? All right. So the youngsters still do that. You're a youngster, by the way. So the youngsters still do that. If you cross your fingers, and if you ever had your hand in your pocket or behind your back when you swore to do something, somebody say what? Show me your fingers. Show me your fingers. In other words, I don't want you crossing your fingers. In other words, you're going to make an oath, but I want to make sure that all the conditions are right for you not to renege on that oath. And so we see, even in our own society, we know how people would be prone to do such things. In more legal matters, nowadays we live in such a sorry world that contracts have to be written, and every single contingency has to be accounted for. And Scott could Scott could tell you far more about this than I could. But Scott, I'm going to assume that there are statements that are designed to blanket everything else. In other words, there might be specific things in a contract that are mentioned, but then we're going to say anything else. Would an act of God be that type of statement? Okay. In other words, in an insurance situation, an act of God might nullify an insurance policy. In other words, you've got insurance on your house against fire unless your house gets struck by lightning. What they call an act of God, which, by the way, that's also a misnomer. It's not like God struck your house with lightning, right? But it's a phrase. It's a phrase that encompasses all things. Anything that might happen that is absolutely beyond our control. And so we understand how these things work. And by the way, contracts, by their very definition, are oaths. Are they not? It's an oath. In other words, when you get ready to buy a house or buy a car or buy some property or buy cattle or you want to borrow money or whatever, and when you sign your name to that loan, what have you done? You've taken an oath. You've committed yourself by signing your name. You've committed yourself to a covenant. You're going to give me this money, and I'm going to pay it back, and I'm going to pay it back at this rate, at this much every month, and at the end of this amount of time, then this thing will be paid off. Well, that's an oath. In other words, you're covenanting with somebody that's going to loan you money in order for you to do what you want to do. And so the idea of taking oaths was not inherently wrong. But the problem was the Jews just found every way in the world not to keep their word. And what Jesus is explaining to us is that He wants us to be, it's not so much that Jesus is concerned about oaths as He is about truthfulness. Let your yes be yes and your no, no. In other words, people need to be able to deal with Christians in such a way as our word would be our bond. In other words, if I was going to borrow money from Jeremiah, and it's a certain amount of money, and I'm saying, all right, Jeremiah, if you'll loan me this money, I'll pay you back $100 a week for this many weeks. All right, now we ought to be able to do that without a piece of paper, without any kind of written agreement. All right, and so that's what Jesus is emphasizing. Let your yes be yes and your no, no. Be a people of your word. If you say you're going to do something, do it. If you say you're not going to do something, don't do it. And you say, well, what might that be? Well, like, for example, a non-compete clause. If you sold a restaurant and you signed, and part of that sale was a no-compete clause. In other words, you can't build up a restaurant and build up a great business and then sell it to somebody and then go across the street and open another restaurant, in order and basically undo all that you've done, and you've benefited yourself here, you benefit yourself there. So there are things whereby we can agree not to do certain things. And we don't. And by the way, we don't want to be a people that are always like the Jews, looking for a loophole. In other words, when we make an agreement, I think pretty much, if Mason and I are talking about a thing and we come to an agreement, we pretty well having the same thing in mind. Whatever it is we've talked about, we've had the same thing in mind. And he's trusting on me that I'm not looking for a loophole to get out of it. And I'm trusting him that he's not looking for a loophole to get out of it. We just accept one another's word and go about our business. That's the emphasis here in verses 33 through 36. And then we get down to, actually I should have said 37 through 37. Then in verse 38, you have heard it's been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. By the way, is that in the Bible? An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? It's there. That's right. It's there. Was it there as a part of? Was it there as a part of the law? Wait a minute. It was a part of the Old Testament law. It was a part of the Old Testament law. Now, a man wasn't bound to exact an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. No, he wasn't bound to do that, but he had the right to do that. But he had the right to do that and no more. Because, we talked about this last time. What is our propensity in matters of retaliation? You do me wrong. You do me wrong on a scale of 1 to 10 out of 5, and I'm going to do you back at what? At 10, or at least a 6, right? You do me wrong on a scale of 1 to 10 out of 5, and I'm going to get you back at least on a 6, and as Bible said, probably a 10.
Yeah, it's back plus interest.
That's right, back plus interest. Back plus interest. And by the way, we are and we'll talk about this, Lord willing, tonight. We're looking at a situation right now in the Middle East where that peaceful nation, those peaceful Islamists, fired 3,500 missiles into Israeli neighborhoods and killed 600 people, wounded 2,000 more, and they kidnapped a bunch of people. Now, one thing that Israel learned a long time ago that we would do well to learn as a nation is eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth doesn't apply in dealing with evildoers among nations. It deals with Christians dealing with other people. I'll just tell you my feelings on the matter. I hope they make a parking lot out of that West Bank. Because that's the only way you deter evil people. Is the only thing they understand is force. That's the only thing they understand. And if they don't do them, but look, I know the Israelis pretty well, just from history. It's fixed to get bad over there for some people, and rightfully so. Because if you want to support terrorists, then you need to suffer. You need to suffer the consequences of such. That's the only thing those folks understand. You can't let them do you that way, and then sign a peacefire agreement while the fires are still burning. Right? Now that's between nations, but we have to make sure that what God permits among governments is not what we practice as individual people. And let me just give you another example closer to home than that. Romans 13 permits the government to practice capital punishment. If you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. That's capital punishment. In other words, Paul condoned the government practicing capital punishment. Now, in many cases, especially in the Old Testament, capital punishment was far worse than the crime that was committed. Right? If a person committed kidnapping, he could be put to death. If a person practiced idolatry, they could be put to death. In other words, there were about 20 different things in Leviticus 17 through Leviticus 20, probably more than 20, that were punishable by death. But why were they punishable by death? In other words, what's the point of the death penalty? The death penalty serves two purposes.
One, that guy will never do it.
That's right. First of all, it punishes the evildoer, and he'll never ever do that again. All right? But then, secondly, what's the? That's exactly right. An example to somebody else. It's just like when I got boarded in school. Y'all know what that means, right? They don't use the board. They used it a whole lot more when I was in school than they use it now. I'll guarantee you that. But when I got boarded in school, it wasn't because I boarded somebody else. It wasn't because I physically harmed somebody else. But what was the purpose? It's going to punish me for wrongdoing in such a way so I don't do it again, and serve as an example to the guy sitting next to me that he better not do that, or he's going to get what he just witnessed me getting in front of the classroom. But again, as Christians, we live, as individuals, as Christians, we live by a different rule. We live by a different rule. And that rule is not an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth anymore. In other words, it's not that we get to exact revenge on those that do us wrong at the exact same level that they did us wrong. Our standard has changed. The idea, if a man smite you on your right cheek, turn to him the other also. We talked about this. What type of action is that? What's involved if a man slaps another man across the face? What's he doing? That's a heck of an insult. That's exactly right. So in other words, we're not talking about a man just random. We're not just talking about a man randomly being assaulted on the streets. Like we see sometimes. People just get sucker punched in the street for no reason or whatnot. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something that is designed to diminish us, to demean us. Now, we also need to understand this. When Jesus says, if a man slaps you on your right cheek, turn to him give him the left or the other also, you have to remember a thing. It's not that you're sticking your face back in his face in order for him to do that again.
Well, to give you an example of it, I don't know if you remember a few years back, a man threw his shoe at us.
Oh yeah, he threw his shoe at George Bush. I remember that.
Now
that's a tremendous insult.
You do not show the bottom of your feet to an Arab.
Right. I mean, there are things that, and we have to be careful about those things when we travel at other places. Kind of like if you go to Ghana, you use your right hand to do everything. You don't use your left hand to do anything. You take the Lord's Supper, you take it with your right hand. You wave at somebody, you wave with your right hand. Because the culture says the left hand is a bad hand. You'd be bad to be left-handed in Ghana, I'll tell you that right now. But I made the mistake of taking the Lord's Supper one time with my left hand. We were at Kwekuma. I hadn't been. I guess probably the second year I might have been there. And I'm sitting there next to Edward, my local guy, and Edward Aqua. And the elements come around, and I just reached up with my left hand and grabbed the bread out of the plate and took it. And Edward leans over and goes, "Don't take the Lord's Supper with your left hand." And so, you know what? I didn't ask him why. If it was important enough for him to whisper in my ear not to take Lord's Supper with my left hand, you know what? When they brought the tray of juice by, you know what I did? Took it with my right hand. Then you find out why afterward. Okay? In other words, you find out, I'll give you another one. For example, it would be an insult if you walked in and, I think this is right, if you're meeting with a group of men, you have to greet them I think from the right all the way around to the left. You don't start with the left and work your way right. Because I think the most important man in the group sits here to your left. And so you shake hands with all the men in a certain direction until you get to the most important man. He's the last one. It's something like that. We had to learn that.
Is that why you pass food to the right?
Ma'am?
That too. You pass the correct way you pass the food is to the right.
Yeah. That may just be to avoid traffic jams at the table.
Well,
I know. I don't know, but the point is that we as Christians we do things differently. We do things differently. I could have been a jerk and say, I'll take the Lord's Supper whatever hand I want to. I mean, the Bible doesn't bind me specifically to take the Lord's Supper with my right hand. But you know what? The Bible does bind me when I learn that it's an insult to somebody else. And so we want to learn to treat people according to the standard that the Scriptures set forth for us. Now, that's all review. Now to verse 43. You've heard it has been said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use and persecute you. I noticed this a long time ago, and it struck me that I hadn't seen it before. Have you noticed the difficulty in verse number 44? No, the increased difficulty. Love your enemies. What? First of all, what? Bless those who curse you. In other words, if somebody says something bad, just respond. As Proverbs 22 and verse 1 says, a soft answer turns away wrath. When people want to lash out at us verbally, our response should be, whatever they give us in stones, we return in cotton. Have a nice day. Yeah, not just in word, but yeah, that's right, Sean. It's not just in word, but it's easy, and that's a great point, because it's easy for us to respond in word in a way that doesn't truly reflect our heart, right? But by the way, even if it didn't reflect my heart, I still need to respond positively to those who, because if nothing else, that's a training exercise for me. I said that, I didn't really mean it, but I should have meant it. Right? In other words, in order to be able to say something nice to somebody who said something ugly to me is an unnatural response. But if I learn to at least give the proper response, it helps train my heart. Sometimes we do things that don't originate in our heart, but understanding it's the right thing to do helps train my heart. And it helps them too. Oh yeah, Peter talks about that. He said that those that speak evil of you may be ashamed. And that's in Romans. Yeah. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him drink. It says, in so doing, you'll heap coals of fire on his head. Which is also an interesting addendum to this is that again, we want to do it because it's the right thing to do, not because we're heaping coals of fire on his head. No, I'm not doing it in order to heap coals of fire on his head. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, but I also understand that when I do that, it's going to wear him out. It's going to wear him out. And so bless those who curse you, then do good to those who hate you. Now we've left the realm of what's easy to say, but then it's even harder to what? To do in the body. For example, how might this play out? And I always thought about this because as a general rule, I try to stop for just about everybody I can. If I see somebody on the side of the road between here and Hamilton, the flashers are on or whatever, I'm going to pull over, or if it's safe, I'm going to stop and I'm going to roll my window down. I'm going to check on them. All right? And I'm going to do my best to help them if they need help. But what if it's somebody I know? What if I see a vehicle on the side of the road? Maybe there's a flat tire, or the flashers are on, or something's going on, and I pull off the side of the road, and I know it's somebody that hates my guts, and they got a flat tire. What am I going to do? That's right. Still going to help them. Still going to help them. See, in other words, there's the idea that you can do good to those who hate you. First of all, you might do it in an unintended way. In other words, by the way, what would it say if I pulled off the side of the road and somebody needed help and they hated my guts and I just left them? They'd hate me even worse, right? You reckon they'd tell anybody I didn't help them? Yeah, you reckon they'd tell everybody I didn't help them? All right, so there's one way, but there are other.
But if you have to, it's going to make him feel bad.
That's exactly right. That's heaping coals of fire on his head. It's going to heap coals of fire on him. But it might be the case.
And besides that, you might gain a friend.
Oh yeah, I mean that's ultimately the purpose. But there might be a case where you hear of someone hear somebody that's in a bind, and you go out of your way to help them. In a little old town like this, bad things happen to people. And again, I'm just pulling one out of thin air. All right, let's say there's somebody that really doesn't like us. All right, but we find out maybe they've got a parent that's sick, or a spouse that's sick, or maybe they get sick. What might I do? I might show them some kindness. I might carry them a plate of food. I might carry them, or I might get Miss Bueller to make a chocolate pie, and I'll take it, and I'll take credit for making it. But it'd be too good; they'd know I didn't make it. But you see what I'm saying? I might go out of my way. I might be able to go out of my way to show kindness to somebody, who's done me wrong. Sometimes I might do it inadvertently, or get in that situation inadvertently and follow through. But it might be the case that I find somebody that I know, and then I do them a kindness. And then the last one is like the hardest one, if you think about it: to pray for our enemies. We bless those that curse us, but we can say good even if it's truly not in our heart, but we're training our heart. Then we can do good to people that we know that don't like us, our enemies. But how hard is it to pray for that person? Because see, when you start talking about prayer, who have you involved in that? Who's necessarily involved in that situation? God is. That's exactly right. Again, I can say things without feeling it in my heart, and God's not necessarily involved. But you understand what I mean by that. Obviously, God is everywhere and knows everything. But when I pray, I've directly involved God in this situation, and that's the hardest thing to do of all of them. You think, well, praying might be the easiest. Oh, no, it's the hardest. Because you can't pray to God and ask for things that you don't really mean. Isn't that right? Well, you better not. I better not pray to God and say something in my prayer to God that I don't really mean. And so that's why I talked about it. I saw it a while back, but I don't think we talk about it enough. Is that there is an increased difficulty in this relationship that we have with our enemies. We don't respond in kind, we respond with kindness. We do good for our enemies as we have opportunity, and then we pray for our enemies. We pray for their soul. We pray for their conversion. We pray for God's providence to be manifest in their life, either through me or some other good act or deed. And so, treating others right. At the bottom of that page means that we love our enemies. All right, let's go to the second page in this lesson. Oh, top line. To be a disciple of Christ is to be different. Is to be different. We are not tax collectors. We are not like the Gentiles. We are children of God. And then, of course, it says the words may be the hardest in all of the Sermon on the Mount. I'd say that's probably an accurate statement. It doesn't say they are, it says probably. But the more we look at this particular text, just speaking for me personally, it's the hardest part. It's the hardest part. Then the third paragraph before the list here says, let us think about what he has said to this point after he told us that our righteousness is to exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees. That's back in verse 20. In other words, here's a summary statement of what Jesus has said and by the way, I think this is somewhat a descriptive statement of how our righteousness is to exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. So starting in verse 21, controlling our anger. Controlling our anger. Whoever is angry with his brother without a cause is in danger. Is in danger of the judgment. If we do wrong, make it right. In other words, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember your brother has something against you, leave your gift at the altar, go your way. Be reconciled to your brother, then come back and offer your gift. In other words, if he has something against you, that means that whatever it is he has against you is valid. It's valid. Be reconciled. Be reconciled. In other words, there's a separation. Reconciliation means to take two parties and bring them back together. So when I've done wrong to my brother, when it comes to my attention, my number one priority is to be reconciled to my brother, because if I'm not reconciled to my brother, I can't worship God acceptably. I can't worship God at all. He won't accept my worship. That's what Matthew 5:21 and following tells us. Number 2, control our desires to the point of figuratively cutting off our hand or plucking out our eye if it causes us to sin. Notice I said figuratively. In other words, take extreme measures to avoid sin. Take extreme measures to avoid sin. Again, and this is not necessarily an extreme measure, but let's just say that a person had a drinking problem, and there was a place that they liked to stop on their way home from work every day. It was right on the way home from work, and they just stopped. All right, if you got to drive 10 miles out of the way to avoid driving by that place, you need to drive 10 miles out of the way to avoid driving by that place. In other words, whatever it takes to help us avoid sin is what we have to do. By the way, it also means cutting people out of our lives. People have to be cut out of our lives to avoid sin. I can't keep people in my life that encourage me to sin or cause or are not helping me go to heaven, so to speak. I've got to get those type of people. I have to get those people out of my life. People that, for example, people that go through drug or other or alcohol addiction programs. One thing they tell you is, you got to find a new group of people to hang out with. I knew a girl in high school. Actually, I was in high school and college. I knew a girl. She was actually a senior in high school. And she ended up in a 30-day drug rehab, in-house, inpatient. You know, the first thing they told her is, you got to quit hanging around with these people. You got to find a new set of people to hang out with. Well, she went through that program and got clean. And the very next weekend, guess who she's running around with? Same people. So guess where she was about 2 or 3 months later? Back in rehab. Not just in the same place in her own life. She was back in the rehab center again. You know, sometimes we have to cut people out of our lives that are detrimental to our spiritual health. Number 3 speaks about being committed to our marriage vows. That's verses 31 and 32 in chapter 5. Do what you say and be a person of great integrity. Number 4, do not retaliate. As a matter of fact, give more than what is asked of you. Number 6, do not withhold your supplies from others. That's from verse 42. Give to him who asks of you. Again, this whole section is dealing with our enemies. In other words, giving to those who ask of us is not some blanket statement that anybody that asks anything of us, we got to give it to them. The whole context is dealing with our enemies and those who do us wrong. You know, if my enemy needs my help and I can help him, then I need to help him. I need to help him. And then lastly, number 7 is to love our enemies. All right. All right, we got time to run the questions real quick. How did the Jewish teachers summarize the passages concerning oaths? For example, in Leviticus 19, Numbers 30, and Deuteronomy 23.
They allowed some us and forbid others.
That's right. They allowed some and forbid others. You know, and only counted the ones that were made by certain means as obligatory. Did Jews allow for some oaths while forbidding others? They did. Let me ask you this. Did Jesus allow for some oaths while forbidding others? He did, because he spoke under oath when he was on trial. Obviously, we know number 3, and I've just answered number 4 inadvertently. Number 5, does Matthew 5:33 to 37 forbid civil oaths, like in a court of law? No, it does not. Not civil oaths. But there are. I noted last time that there are exceptions. Or it says, "Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth when you enter into a court of law?" What principle? Well, an eye for an eye. Let's get to this number 7. What is the meaning of the principle of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? In other words, what was the purpose of that? That's right, to limit retaliation or to limit vengeance. What did Jesus teach concerning retaliation and personal revenge? What did Jesus teach? What? Turn the cheek. That's right. Don't. he taught don't. You know, no retaliation or personal revenge. We didn't look at the passage in Romans, but the Bible says, "Vengeance is mine; I will repay," saith the Lord. I believe it's Romans 14. I think it's about verse 19. What are the most challenging verses in the Sermon on the Mount, according to this lesson? Matthew 5:43 and following. Love your enemies. Love your enemies. Now I just answered number 10. And we didn't talk about Matthew 5:48. Be perfect even as your Father in heaven is perfect. What does that mean, to be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect? What's the word perfect mean? As it's used in the Bible, not as used in the English language. Yeah, without blemish. Fully grown and mature is the specific. That's right. The word there is teleos, means to be complete or whole. like a circle, or maybe some type of. I always think about some type of not a globe, but like a ball or something. It's complete. It's the same all the way. It's the same all the way around. It's whole. All right. Next week, lesson 27.